Prayer is the simplest form of speech that infant lips can try. Prayer, the sublimest strains that reach the majesty on high.
Welcome to the benefice of Fairlight and Pett in the beautiful county of East Sussex. I'm David Hornsby, a church warden here, and I want to talk to you about prayer. I've entitled this talk, Prayer, the Underused Resource for All Christians. But first we have a reading from the Gospel of Mark.
Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it. Yet he couldn't keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "First, let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "For such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone.
A man in the church where I used to worship once shocked me when he stated that he didn't believe prayer actually did anything. It didn't change anything except perhaps it made the person praying feel a bit better, less uncomfortable. Well, little wonder in a way. In the media, if a tragedy is reported, we hear phrases such as, "We send our thoughts and prayers." Really? You're going to pray for the person? I doubt it, but it sounds good, I suppose. But Jesus spent much time praying. Before every major decision or event in his life, he prayed. Often he got up early to find a quiet place to spend time in prayer. He said, "Men and women ought always to pray and not to faint." Actually, he didn't include the "and women" bit, but I'm sure had he said it today, he would have been politically correct and included that. There are many other examples in the Bible that encourage us to pray, yet I find prayer hard. Probably most of us do. Jesus never taught much theology, but he did tell lots of stories, and so I want to encourage you to pray, to use the opportunities we have to communicate with our Maker by telling you 3 short stories about prayer. The first ends with the song of praise that we had read to us earlier. The writer was Hannah, who was married to a God-fearing man called Elkanah, who took his family every year, as prescribed by the law of Moses, to worship and sacrifice at the temple at Shiloh. Elkanah's other wife, Peninnah, and her children went too, and that is where the big problem arose. Hannah was barren. God had made her so. Peninnah needled her and then tormented Hannah. I imagine she might have said things like, "Isn't it a good thing that I have borne our husband children, some sons and daughters? What sort of wife do you think you are when you don't have any children? You must feel terrible. I know I would if I was in your shoes. Perhaps our husband doesn't love you." Poor Hannah. She was reduced to tears. This went on for year after year. Elkanah tried to comfort her, but in vain. Finally, at feast time in the temple, she was so desperately unhappy, she went to the temple in a state of utter despair to pray. She was shaking with emotion Her voice prayed to God silently, but her lips moved. She was in such a state that she made a bit of a spectacle of herself and attracted the attention of the senior priest Eli, who assumed she was drunk. "Put away your wine, woman," he said as he walked up to her. Hannah replied, "Not so, my lord. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul before the Lord. I'm not a bad woman." Eli did a quick turnabout. He answered, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." Next year, she didn't go with the others to the feast at Shiloh. She was weaning her newborn son. What an answer to prayer! Was she overjoyed? I should say so. But she had made a vow in her prayer to give her son to the Lord for his service. So, when he was old enough, she took her little boy with her to the temple for the annual feast and gave him to a rather surprised Eli as a sort of apprentice. And her son Samuel grew up in stature and in power. He succeeded Eli when Eli died and was responsible for anointing Israel's first two kings, King Saul and after him King David. So a desperately offered prayer was answered. And actually we understand a little bit more about why God initially closed Hannah's womb. Hannah had further children as well, 3 sons and 2 daughters. Well, that's my first example. The next one is a bit shorter. It's in the New Testament reading that we just had. Jesus' ministry was primarily to the Jews, God's chosen people. Now, after a particular hard period of work, of ministry, Jesus just needed a rest. He was trying to keep quiet, try and keep his whereabouts secret. However, a Greek woman, a Gentile, who had a little girl who was possessed by an evil spirit, found him. She fell at Jesus' feet. "Please heal my daughter. Drive out the demons," she prayed. Now you might object, David, she wasn't praying. But if prayer isn't talking to Jesus, then I don't know what prayer is. And face-to-face prayer is as valid as our prayers, which are not face-to-face, but offered in faith. Now, Jesus could not perform many mighty works where there was no faith. When he healed, he also felt power go from him. And right now he was weary. Even so, Jesus' reply appears to us to be actually rather shocking. Although it didn't upset this Gentile woman. He said, "First let the children receive the bread. For it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." Jesus was calling the woman a dog. The woman was not put off. She came back with a reply which I imagine brought a broad smile to Jesus' face. I'd have loved to have seen it. I wonder how often our prayers bring a smile to Jesus. "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Jesus commended her desperate, heartfelt reply. When she arrived home, her child was lying on her bed, healed. Again, we have a desperate, heartfelt prayer answered. My third story is a personal one. When I was 20 years old, I did a very silly thing. I had a lovely girlfriend called Valerie, and being young and stupid and wishing to show off my strength, one day, when we were about to climb some stairs with her, I thought I would pick her up and carry her up to show my strength. Now, I've always run up and down stairs 2 at a time. I think I picked up the habit from my father. But you know, it saves so much time in life. So Valerie was lifted up in my arms, and I ran up the stairs 2 at a time, or at least I started to. After a couple of steps, I suddenly felt this sharp pain in my back and gingerly put Valerie down. I could still walk around with care, and the pain, fortunately, didn't persist for very long. About 6 or so years later, we were married by then and living in our own first tiny house. I leaned forward one day to pick up the kettle from the stove, and the pain came back sharply in exactly the same place. And this time, I was in agony. I could hardly get comfortable, and getting in and out of bed was a major and painful experience. I hobbled round like a cripple. The doctor prescribed painkillers and muscle relaxants, and they did help a bit. He said things would sort themselves out in a week or so. They didn't. After about 10 weeks, when things seemed just as bad and I was wondering if I would be a semi-cripple for the rest of my life, I did something else that I felt at the time was foolish. Our church offered special prayers for any individual who went up after a communion service. Sometimes nobody went up. Other weeks somebody might ask for help in perhaps a decision-making for a new job, or ask for prayer for healing for some ill friend, or some such thing. Now, I'm a shy introvert, and I can tell you I would never go and ask for help like that. I just wouldn't, it's not me. But after 10 weeks or so of misery, I finally plucked up courage, and with everybody else in the church watching, shyly and nervously, I went forward, trying not to limp too much, and asked for prayers for my back to be healed. The rector prayed for me aloud, with everybody listening and watching. There was a sudden clap of thunder and lights shined around. No, actually nothing happened, or so it seemed. I went back to my seat, a bit crestfallen, and we all went home. Next morning, my back did actually seem a bit eased. And by the end of the week, there was a very noticeable improvement. And this continued over the next few weeks. It got better and better. Life was pleasant again. Some might say that healing was just a coincidence. For me, it really was a miracle. If you like, a God incidence rather than a coincidence. It only happened after I had taken a desperate measure in faith. A member of St Andrews has recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer. We've been praying earnestly for life-saving healing. After lengthy treatment followed by a short spell in a hospice, the latest report from the consultant was that the cancer was virtually undetectable, and blood tests and bone density have improved in an amazing way. Another God incidence? Anyway, I hope this encourages you, as it does me, to pray more. But let's think for a moment. What sort of prayers are most effective? Well, large books are written on this subject. In the perhaps 3.5 examples I've given, I would pick out 3 particular aspects. Firstly, and I'll probably say that I'm emphasizing this the most, all prayers were prayed from the heart. They weren't prayers read out of a book, almost parrot fashion. A cassette tape recorder can recite prayers, but are they meaningful? Now, I'm not saying formal prayers have no place, because they can be heartfelt and very helpful. A hymn writer, John Burton, composed a 4-line hymns about 150 years ago which summarises this difference very well. He wrote, "I often say my prayers, but do I ever pray? And do the wishes of my heart go with the words I say? In other words, am I praying parrot fashion or from the heart?" Hannah was praying from the depths of her heart. The woman with the demon-possessed daughter was praying from deep in her heart, distressed enough to break the social etiquette and approach a foreign Jewish healer. So praying from the heart seems to be absolutely important. But also, two other little things. All the examples demonstrate that faith was demonstrated. Those praying expected an answer, realizing that if they didn't get it, they might end up looking rather foolish. And all three examples show a trust in God that he had the power to perform a miracle. But look, before I finish, I've got to point out one more thing. God is sovereign. And although he will listen to every honest prayer, that doesn't mean he will always answer yes. For example, recently a Californian church with a tradition for praying for healing and seeing miraculous results prayed for a sick and dying 2-year-old girl called Olive. Special prayer meetings were held for many nights. This church, which is actually quite well known for its worship music and its healing ministry, even extended its prayer request online with the hashtag #WakeUpOlive. By then, baby Olive had actually died. However, there was a profound belief by the church that she would be resurrected on the 3rd day. All aspects of the three things that I've just talked about, the praying from the heart, the faith that God can listen and will answer, and the trust that God had the power, all those were present. Prayer was answered, and the answer was no. We don't yet know why. On one occasion, Jesus prayed and his prayer was answered with a no. Can you believe that? Jesus' prayer, answer is no. When was it? Well, if you remember, it was the night before his crucifixion. And he asked that the cup of God's wrath would be taken from him. He prayed from the heart. He was desperate and emotionally disturbed. Take this cup from me, but your will be done. God saw fit that Jesus should take the penalty for our sin in his death. By accepting such a hideous suffering, it showed the depth of his love for us. Anyway, I hope I've encouraged you to examine your prayer life. And you know, I've certainly been challenged as I prepared this address. Remember, prayer should be from the heart. Prayer needs to be offered in faith. And prayer needs a belief that God has the power to answer. And of course, prayer is not just asking for blessing. I haven't touched on prayers of worship or prayers of confession or thanksgiving, for instance. Perhaps another time. Above all, please don't think of prayer as a boring obligation, a necessary ritual, or an inconvenience. Certainly never a burden, but rather a resource for all Christians. Probably a vastly underused resource. Remember those words of Jesus. Men and women ought always to pray and not to faint.
Prayer is the soul's sincere desire, uttered or unexpressed, the motion of a hidden fire trembles in the breast. Prayer is the burden of a sigh, the falling of a tear, the upward glancing of an eye when none but God is near. Prayer is the simplest form of speech that infant lips can try. Prayer, the sublimest strains that reach the majesty on high. Prayer is the Christian's vital breath, the Christian's native air, his watchword